Alright, Chapter 11. Chapter 11, General Engine Questions and Answers. Okay. Alright, Chapter 11, General Engine Questions and Answers. What are the fusible plugs, and what are their purpose? The two fusible plugs are generally known as lead plugs, fitted into a crown sheet of each firebox. It is central position approximately 1 foot from each end of the crown sheet, with the ends of the plugs projecting into the water space. The plugs are made of brass and have holes bored through them. The holes are filled with lead, which melts at a comparative low temperature. Refer to Figure 8 of Annex A. If the plugs are not covered with water, what lead metals run out, leaving a clear with water with lead melts runs out, and leaving the clear hole through the water, and steam will rush on to the fire, and thus warning enginemen and of shortage of water in the boiler should occur. The fire must be smothered, withdrawn immediately. Arrangements should be made to lock the fire door. Assistance should be obtained, and the engine prepared for towing. Note: under no circumstances should injectors be used if this should occur. What is the purpose of a steam dome? The purpose of a steam dome is to provide a space as high as possible above the water in the boiler, so that the steam being fed from the boiler to the steam chest, Westinghouse pump, other appliances using steam will be as dry as possible. Consequently, the regulator valve through the boiler steam passes the steam chest and is situated in the dome. The dome is also conveniently placed for safety valves to be located. What is the purpose of dampers? Dampers are provided with the purpose of controlling the admission of air underside of the fire bed. They are also used as inspection, cleaning out ash pans. What is the purpose of a brick arch? The brick arch is a baffle protecting the tubes from the cold draw air, and this is drawn through the fire doors when firing. It assists to prevent the fine particles from the fuel from being drawn and thrown through the tubes, and thus it also acts to some extent as a spark arrestor. They aid combustion by lengthening the path of the gases from the fire bed to the tubes and retaining the gases for a long period in the firebox. This allows more time for the gases to mix with the air in ignition. The brick arch also remains and retains intense heat. This tends to maintain a temperature in the firebox, more even temperature in the firebox, and prevents sudden chilling of the firebox when the firebox is withdrawn. What are the tubes provided in the boilers? The function of the tubes is to carry out smoke and gases combustion from the firebox to smoke box. In doing so, impart the intense heat of water which surrounds the tubes, thus giving the greater heating surface and causing the steam to be generated quickly. On reaching the smoke box, the gases pass to the atmosphere. Tubes also act as stays as the tube plates. What is the purpose of a safety valve? Safety valves are the purpose of releasing steam pressure into the boiler when it rises above predetermined point, so they do not do this automatically. Under all conditions, they can adjust the spring-loaded valve, their loading being set on the mechanical staff. They are usually 2 or 3 safety valves situated with the top of the dome. Describe the locomotive boiler. A locomotive boiler is a tubular boiler fitted with an internal firebox, the cylindrical barrel with the smoke box at one end of the firebox at the other. The firebox is constructed with inner and outer walls held together by stay bolts in the manner which permits the circulating between the walls. The walls are held together at the bottom of the rivets passing through the foundation ring. The ring is extended around the bottom of the firebox. The crown sheet forms the top of the inner wall of the firebox, is supported and stays passing through the thread holes in the crown sheet and outer shell. It is the portion of the firebox that most rapid evaporation takes place. The lead plugs also are placed in the crown sheet, as a portion of the boiler is in the first to be affected by the fire when the boiler is too low in water. The front inner wall of the firebox forms a tube plate. The upper portion of was drilled in the carrying tube. The tube passes through the cylindrical barrel to the boiler, being secured at the front end of the correspondence holes in the front of the tube plate. The tube leads into the smoke box, which is riveted to the front end of the barrel. The front outer wall and firebox termed the throat of the plate. The flange riveted to the barrel plate. The side outer walls and firebox are from the casing and outer shell of the boiler. The rear outer wall, termed the backplate, from the end of the boiler. The backplate is the fire hole, which is the opening through the coal is normally fed to the firebox. The fire gate of the fire bars from the bottom of the firebox. The heat gases given off by the fuel in the firebox heat of the water circulating around the firebox passes through the tube, heating with the water surrounding the ladder. The gases are carried into the smoke box after passing through the spark arrestor, escaping up into the chimney. Move the plugs at the fitted with the situated place on the boiler, particularly around the firebox, to permit of the boiler being kept clean and water spaces kept free by washing out. Refer to Figure 8 of the Annex A. What is the boiler and what is its use? The boiler consists of a copper tube connected to the steam cock, extending along the outside of the boiler, then entering the small box, terminating in a circle surrounding top of the blast plate, where it is held with the position directly under the chimney. The circulation portion of the tube blanked off at the end and perforated with normal hose directed the chimney. On opening the steam cock, the steam passing through the holes expand and it passes up in the funnel, causing the gases and air in the smoke box to be discharged. The result in the particular vacuum being formed in the smoke box causes a draw-out of the air to the atmospheric pressure to pass through the dampers, grates, and firebed to destroy the vacuum. This draw-out makes the fire burns fiercely and give off greater heat. The blower should only be used lightly to raise the steam, but should not use to when the fire is withdrawn, blank low, burn through, as causes for the cold air to be drawn into the firebox. Unequal contraction, boiler plates to occur, which results in leakage of the tubes and stays. If used too strong at the wrong time, the boiler becomes an abuse and will damage the boiler. The duty of the blower is to create a drought on the fire to prevent gases in the firebox from entering the cab and to start the fire. Raise the steam pressure gradually. If used judiciously in conjunction with the firing, it will do away with the dense black smoke. Alright, name the parts of the smoke box of the locomotive. The smoke box of the engine contains a blast pipe, nozzle to exhaust the steam to the atmosphere that after it is done into the working cylinders. Steam pipes and conveying with the steam to the steam chests and the deflectors plates of the purpose giving a more even flow of the gates through the tubes. A spark arrestor to break up the cinders and through the drawn in from the firebox a small mesh allowing particles of ash being broken so finely that they cannot cause damage. The Westinghouse pump exhaust pipe, which is connected with the blast pipe, wash plugs washing out of the barrel as the ejector chute of the removal of the smoke ash, and the blower pipe perforated ring to induce the flow of gas through the fire door and raise the steam gradually. When should the ash pan water be used? It should be turned on before an attempt is made to open the ash pan slides, preparing to clean the fire, and should be left on fully all-time cleaning in progress. It is essential that the flood ash pan to prevent fire and ash and dust rising coming into the contact with the bearings, and also quench all the fire to be de-ashed. Fine ash mixed on oil bearing for aces causes the latter to wear quickly, resulting in pounding. Name the parts of a cellar's injector. The outside connection of the body of the injectors are the steam pipe, supply pipe, water supply pipe, and delivery pipe, and overflow pipe. The internal parts of the injector include the steam, water valve, overflow, non-return check valve, and supplementary water pipe. It also contains the lifting nozzle, forcing nozzle, and combining delivery tubes. Refer to Figure 9A and B, Annex A. Alright, what are the likely defects of the injector, and the remedies defects are likely to occur. Remedies of some are also as follows: storage and water in the tender. Tenders should be filled and dirty screen in the union hose of a suction pipe. To be uncoupled and cleaned. Whistles uncoupled and overflow of the valve and should be used and closed with a cam lever. The water valve and the steam valve open with the steam blown back through the uncoupled suction pipe. The overflow valve should be reopened and the water cock on the tender opened to make sure that the full supply of the water passes through the uncoupled water pipe. At the same time, the position of the handling when the water is flowing out in full is on is noted. The conical screen is replaced and the suction pipe is coupled up. Add a tight lid in the back of the tender may cause the airlock and hold the water back. If so, the lid of the tender should be lifted. Steam and clack valves blowing in the cause of the injector overheater result in water flashing in the steam, preventing the vacuum from being created in the suction pipe. The defector valve should be locked in for attention. Meanwhile, the injector should be cooled down in the cold water, enabling it to be operated, reducing the steam pressure with often to assist the work of an injector tending to overheat and then leak into the suction pipes will also cause the trouble in correction of the vacuum, and if in such cases loose joints should be tightened up. How is an injector operated? To operate the injector is first ascertain that the tender is supplied with water sufficient to steam and available for the use of the injector. The steam valve of the supply pipe is fully open. Water supply valve on the tender is open, and it is certain that the clack valve stop the cock is open. The water regulating the valve is open with the steam valve open with just sufficient to allow the small amount of the steam passing through the first and lifting nozzle through the body of the injector. It lift the overflow valve escape to the overflow pipe. This creates a vacuum in the body of the injector suction pipe. The vacuum is turned on to destroy the action of the atmospheric pressure acting on the top of the water in the tender, forcing the water into the body of the injector and out of the overflow pipe. When the water appears at the overflow pipe, the steam valve starting and lever should be drawn out of the full travel to allow the full flow of steam passing through the forceful nozzle, then steam mixing at the water and combining delivery tubes and condensed forms of solid steam water, and it will velocity of the delivery pipe in such that it opens the clack valve and enters the boiler against the boiler pressure. The combining tube is perforated and surrounded with water, which drawn and combining with the tube is maintaining a constant stream of water into the boiler where the injector is operating. If the clack valve becomes stuck while it's open in position, when action should be taken to remedy trouble, an attempt should be made to close the valve, tapping the clack box and piece of wood with a piece of wood or pouring cold water over it. This is not successful. The stop water must be closed and the check clack valve is given attention. What are the principles of the boiler boiler? What is the principles causing the boilers to fail and steam freely? Tubes blocked up the dirty, defective brick arch, defective plate. Leaky wall stay, flanges, tubes, dampers not properly open, adjust dirty, shocked, and bad firing, smoke box drawing air at the draw door, steam pipe, saddles casting as an ash ejector chute, spark arrestor blocked up, and the plastic is choked up in the outline of the blowing at the base of the pump exhaust pipe, and the blowing leaking at the connections into the smoke box valves and pistons blowing through the badly. What are the causes of smoke arresters and blocking? Working with the fire door closely with the engine up under heavy steam, uneven in the coal fire bed, the dampers not often sufficiently choked blast pipe. Working with the fire bars engines as under heavy steam when the blower is hard on the opening of the regulator full wide at the first pull will running the rise and grade with the boiler priming. If the steam falls quickly when the regulator is open, what are the principal causes? The valves, piston blown through, steam blowing through the superheater, heaters, elements, and steam pipe joints. Alright, how many tests made with the steam blows can cause bad steaming? The brakes should be applied hard on smoke box door open, reversing lever placed in the central position, regular open, all joints smoke box are examined for leaks. Defective joints are sometimes can be observed, noting the absence of a soot and dull sheen caused by steam blowing from the defective joint to joint. If the blast pipe defects, the joint should be examined while the engine is moved slowly under the steam and the brakes applied. Question: what should be done if a tube bursts? Both injectors should be put on to maintain water high enough to the boiler, reduce the steam pressure. Every effort should be made to get the strain to the box flat. The fire should be withdrawn and engine stabled until repairs are arranged. What should be done if the lead plug fuses with water registering correctly with the gauge blast? Both injectors should be put on to maintain high water level. Steam pressure should be reduced. The fire should be withdrawn. Assistance arranged for the necessary of the engine prepared for the towing of the box flats. If the plugs diffuse due to short water, it is not registering gauge glass. The fire should immediately be smothered, covering the top of the funnel, smoke box, ash injector, steam plug should be turned on, the dampers closed, and the fire withdrawn as quickly as possible. On no account should the injectors be on to the raise of the water level with the damage of the boiler. Assisting should be arranged with the engine prepared for the towing. In each case, the fire door must be locked at the first available opportunity. What precautions should be taken to avoid tubes leaking? A bite fire and even firebox temperature should always be maintained. To use the blower should be avoided as much as possible. The ashpan slide should never be allowed to remain open except when dumping acid. When attention of the tubes and smoke box, etc., by the driver's shed staff is necessary to get the best work out of the engine. If necessary, to frequently attending the cleaning fires, brick archers, tubes, smoke box screens, and blast pipe. Many divers and firemen do not realize the value of the regular attention to these parts. Only the work that neglected is happening with the engine. Happens that the engine is condemned with being unstable when such would not be the case. If the blast pipe, etc., were properly locked, after the most suitable time to do this is when the engine is without fire and steam. The firebox should be examined with a good and going inside it. All cylinders, the firebox should be examined by going inside it. All cylinders and clinkers should be removed from the black corners of the box, tube ends, and the brick arch of the fire bars, and should be examined. And before the coming out, and the top half of the tube should be swept through and lead plugs inspected. At smoke box and the lower tubes and spark arresters, blasting pipe should be thoroughly cleaned. It is also very important the bottom of the smoke box should be kept airtight, with occasionally putting either the mixture of the tar, sanding, sediment, and around the steam in the blast pipes. If at all the purpose of regularly cleaned with the boilers and steam well, the full-size nozzle to run faster, the pull better on the account of the free exhaust through the fuel and sparking cinders out of the chimney. All smoke box joints should be made thoroughly airtight with the portion of the work slummed. The smoke box will always draw air with the result of the boiler within the steam within the full-size nozzle. Ashes will be taken. Fire into the smoke box be thrown out of the chimney, while the blast and the partial vacuum the smoke box will destroy the boiler, hindering the boiler hindering from steaming. Question: what are the relative positions of the crank pins on each side of the engine? The crank on one side are 90 degrees ahead of those of the other side. Whether the left-hand crank is set ahead of the right-hand crank is described as being a left-leading engine. Why are the cranks set at right angles? The cranks are set at right angles so that when one piston is at the end of the stroke, the full power is being exerted on another. Question: what is the piston when the piston is at the end of the stroke? What is the position of the valve? The valve is the position so that it allows a small opening of the steam port that permits the steam to pass through the steam chest into the cylinder. This opening the steam port is caused by the leading of the valve. What is the purpose of lead? Lead allows the flow of the steam to enter the cylinder, just as the position finished in its stroke acts as a cushion to advance pistons. Also assist the piston when changing direction. Is the amount of lead the same for all travels of the valve? On engines fitted with the Wells Chester valve gear, the lead is constant, but in the case of the engines filled with Stepson's valve gear, the lead increases as the valve travels and shorten. Question: what is the piston end of its stroke? What is the position of the crank? The crank is on dead center. It will then be a straight line with the crush head, pin, and driving wheel center. When one crank is dead center, what will be the position of the crank on the opposite side? The crank on the opposite side is either in top or bottom quarter, accordingly whether the engine is left leading or the right leading. Left or leading or right leading. Alright, what is the left-hand crank on the back, dead end center? What will be the position of the valve on both sides? Assuming the left-hand leading engine, the valve on the left side will open the left back port to lead, respectively the position of the reverse lever. If the valve on the right side will open on the front port of the lever is placed in the forward gear, following an open back of the lever and is placed in the back gear, it will close both the ports with the lever and placed out of gear and in the center position. Alright, what are the relationships between the piston and the crank? The piston is attached to the crank means by the crossing head and connection rod. The motion of the piston is imported with the crank so that while the piston moves backwards, forwards in the cylinder in the horizontal path, the crank rotates and moves in the circular path. What is a slide valve? The slide valve device travels over the seating containing the ports and controls the emission steams from the exhaust and cylinder from the cylinder exhaust. What are the functions of a slide valve? To admit the live steam in each of the end of the cylinder is turned, and the cutoff the supply steam is either in the end of the cylinder at its cylinder point of the stroke, point of piston stroke, or to allow use of steam at one end of the cylinder to commence passing to the exhaust before leaving the steam is emitted to it at the other end. What is the purpose of a knuckle joint? They provide flexibility to the rod so that when running over the uneven portions of the road rods are enabled to accommodate them unevenness, thus avoiding a breaking strand being thrown out on the rods. What are the wheels? Why are the wheels coupled together? To enable the use of the more than one pair of wheels in the propulsion of the engine and distribute the weight required adhesion of the engine in such a manner that permissible axle loads will not exceed. What is meant by the adhesion of the engine? Adhesion of the engine is a frictional grip of the coupled wheels on the rails and governed by the weight of the wheels, nature of the surface of the wheels, and tread rail. If the engine has sufficient adhesion, what should be the result? The engine wheels will slip when the power was applied, but the power used to rotate the wheels would exceed the frictional resistance of the adhesion weight. Question. What are the natural factors will reduce the adhesion of the wheels? A wet, greasy rail, which lessens the friction between the wheel and the rail. How will slipping of the wheels overcome? By using sand and judicious handling on the part of the driver. Q. What is the support of the weight of the boiler? The frame support the weight of the boiler. It also carries a cylinder valve gear that absorbs through the spring and many shocks in its incidental running. What is the general arrangement of the frame? The PB-15 locomotive and the Kilroy also fitted with the plate frames. These consist of two main plates extending from the front of the buffer beams of the headstock to the rear of the buffer beam. The plates are spaced with rigidly braced and means with the smoke box saddle on the front end of the drag box and rear end. Also means that the cross stays attached with the various points in between. When necessary, the plates are cut in way to clear the axle box, etc. How is the boiler supported with the engine frames? A. At the front of the end of the smoke box, which is riveted to the boiler, right, bolted to the saddle casting, preventing any of the movement of the boiler at this end. The usual method of supporting the remainder of the boiler is means of expansion brackets and angles attached to either side of the outer box fire shell. These brackets rest on the brackets riveted with the engine frame to the bracket and bolted together in the manner which will permit the trailing of the end of the boiler to the freely move the backwards forward as the boiler expands and contracts. A clip over the top expansion bracket is attached to the frame brackets as preventing the boiler from lifting in the case of the derailments, etc. How is the weight of the engine supported? By bogies and wheel springing. What classes of springs is used on the engine? The springs are used on the Queenstown locomotives are laminated springs, consist of a series of leaves and plates of equal in length of each of the plate, progressively decreasing. The leaves are bounded together in century of means of buckle. The springs are either flat or cambered, slightly curved, or deeper, thicker in the middle than at the ends. As the force exerted with the springs, they deflect the tin flashing out of the absorbs much of the shock that would otherwise have been borne by the engine. How are the springs fitted in the case of underslug and under ordinary springing in the case of overhead springing? The springs are hung with the T-hangers situated under the engine axle boxes. The end of each spring are attached by the means of adjusting screws, pedestals fastened to the frame. The adjusting screws permit each of the spring to adjust to the taking the weight is designated to carry. The system suspension generally referred to as non-compensated or independent springing. When the spring is compensated, the spring in each of the compensated group are interconnected by the means of pivoted compensation beams. That the pivots being pivoted attached to the frame from between each two adjacent springs. The outer end of the springs are at either of the group and attached with the pedestal fastened to the frame. B. While overhead springs, the springs are situated above the engine axle boxes. The load between the transmitted with the boxes and springs, the vice versa. The means are strut in similar arrangements. Springs are compensated in a similar manner described in A. Question: what is the purpose of compensation beams? You connect the springs in such a way that in the event of the unevenness of the road that may cause the heavy shock to the engine, the load will distribute over the more than one spring than the whole load of the due. The shock will not be thrown on any one spring. In some cases, the compensated beams are also designed to redistribute the spring height. Question: how are the cylinders attached to the engine? One engine is fitted with the plate and frames to each of the cylinder. Its steam chest from one unit, which is secured to the frame by the means of bolts. What is the steam chest? The steam chest is an upper chamber of the cylinder unit, which the valve works, in which they are situated with the emission and the exhaust ports to and from the cylinder. What is the cylinder? The cylinder is a chamber below the steam chest in which the piston works to and fro through, causing the wheels to rotate. What is the piston? The piston consists of a circular head attached to the piston rod and securely by means of a nut. Is more freely than the cylinder made by the steam-tight rings and placed in the grooves around the periphery. Question: to what piston rod attached? The piston rod attached with the crosshead, to which the head is secured with the means of the crosshead cotter. What is the purpose of the crosshead? It informs a point of connection between the piston and the connection rod, on which the reciprocating motion of the piston transmits power through the connection rod and causes the rotation of the wheels. What are the prevention of the steam in the cylinder passing out along the piston rod? The provision of the bushing stuffing boxes when packed in the metal backing kept in place with the spring and the gland standing studs in the back cylinder secure the gland. What supports the crossheads as it moves into and fro? The guide bars. What are the guide bars? How are the guide bars fitted? The attached with the back cylinder cover at one end of the motion or speculate the plate of the other end and are held in position means the studs and are bolts. What is the crosshead? What is crosshead? The block of the metal provides the connection between the piston rod and connection rod at one end of the boss into the end of the position rod is fitted with the body of the crosshead. It is hollowed out with the receive the small end of the connection rod with the secured with the crosshead means of the guide pin. The crosshead is also fitted with the shoes which bear the guide bars. Which guide bar is subject to the greatest string? The top bar, the top of the running forward with the steam applied at the bottom of the bar, or when running back gear with steam applied, or when running forward without the steam applied. What is the purpose of the guide bars? To support the crosshead to keep the both in the piston in with the axle and the cylinder. If the guide bar are not kept properly closed, what will be effective? The crosshead works from fro and to keep it through the true line, which causes the wear of the piston gland tended to wear the back packing, causing the steam blow from the cylinder. It will also cause the shoes to slap these wet bars hard with the engine and shut off when the engine is shut off when the cranking is passing the dead center. In the event of the guide bars running hot, what can be done to overcome the trouble? Take a linear out back end of the place in front of the end in the front end. Increase the distance between the top and the bottom bars. Allow the free movement of the crosshead. Question: how many types of slide valves are there in place? There are two types. There are two types of slides. Two types of slides: the D-slide valve and the piston valve. The PBF-B15 locomotive kill ray are both filled with the D-slide valves. Question: what are the parts connected with the exhaust called? The exhaust ports. What are the ports through the steam flows through the steam chest to the cylinder called emission ports? How is the steam exhausted from the cylinder? With the D valve of the exhaust cavity of the valve connects with the steam port with the exhaust port, and the steam escapes through the port which is entered in. If it then passes the way of the valve cavity to exhaust the passage up the blast pipe and the chimney to the atmosphere. How is the emission of the steam cut off between the piston reaches the end of the stroke? If in case of the D valve, the having proportion of the valve which seats over the ports by made longer than the distance between the outside edge of the ports, thus causing the valve to overlap the steam ports with the century. What events takes place in the cylinder during the revolution wheels? To take a piston as being at one end of the cylinder, steam the transmission with the cylinder at the end of the axis of the piston, causing the piston to move. The full pressure is exerted on the piston until the period or point of the cutoff when the steam is exhausted. Steam already contained with the cylinder continues the act of the piston until it's near the end of the stroke. The period is called the period of extension, and the period in which the advantage is taken the property of the expansion of the steam. The piston of the near the end of the stroke, the valve opens to the ports through which the steam is emitted, but the cylinder allows the steam in the cylinder to escape the exhaust. The valve permitting with the escape of the steam to continue while the piston travels on the portion is returned to the stroke. This is known as the period of exhaust and continues until the valve closes at the exhaust port. From the point of the period, the compression begins and continues until the piston has returned stroke. By the time the return stroke has been completed, the valve has partially opened the emission port. The amount of the opening being lead of the valve at the closing of the increasing the degree of the compression. If too much lead were allowed through the movement of the piston at this point, would be unduly retarded. Steam is emitted to each side of the piston, or alternately sequence of the vent at each side of the being the same. This was while the steam is being emitted, expanded on one side of the piston, is being exhausted and compressed on the other side of the vice versa. Which means is adapted to enable the valve to emit the shut-off steam of the cylinder to permit the steam exhaust by the means of the valve gear, which is the mechanism with the control of the movement of the valve, enables the engine to be reversed. What are the types of valve gears are in the QPSR locomotive? The Stepson, Link motion, and the Walsall valve gear. They give a short description of the Stepson Link motion as fitted in the PB15 locomotive. Stepson link motion operated with the four eccentric fitted with the driving axle placed in between the frames of the engine, that is being one back gear eccentric and one fore-gear eccentric on each side. The four-gear eccentric rod is attached to the top of the link, and through the back gear eccentric rod to the bottom of the link. The link is attached with the lifting arms with the weight of the bar shaft, which is connected in means of the reaching the rod with the reversing lever. The link has been curved slot, and the quadrant block operates with the radius and slot being equal to the length of the eccentric rods. The quadrant block remains stationary. The linking sliding around the block is lowered and raised accordingly to the direction of the travel. The quadrant block is attached to the transmission bar, which is on the other end of the connector to the inside rocker and supported by the transmission link. The outside rocker, which is part of the same block as inside rocker and is connected with the valve spindle, which is connected with the slide valve, means for the valve yoke. The eccentrics are fitted with the axle such that they are spent behind crank, and the movement of the valve is relation for the piston will cause the valve events to occur with the proper time. When the link is lowered toward the quadrant block, it is under the influence of the four-gear eccentric and cause the engine to move toward the wheel when steam applied. Refer to Figure 10 in Annex A. Give a short description of Wasatch's valve as fitted with the Kilroy. Wasatch's valve gear to the two motion, one of which is derived with the eccentric arm, the other from the crosshead. The two motions are combined so that the full control of the valve is obtained. The eccentric arm is contained with the main crank pin within the century of the 98 degrees ahead of the crank pin. In this case, the valve outside of emission is 90 behind the crank, and the cross valve in the emission inside emission. The eccentric gives no angular advance and has no influence in the lap or lead of the valve. The lead of the valve is constant controlled by the movement of the crosshead, which is connected with the radius, and the valve spindle means the combination of lever drag link. The reversing link oscillates with the fixed axis of the curvature of the link and has radius equal to the length of the radius rod. The radius rod is connected to the front end of the combination lever. The point of the connection of the combination lever is above the valve spindle connection. When the valve is in emission, type of below the valve spindle connection with the valve is outside of the emission. The motion of the eccentric arm is conveyed by the reversing linking of the eccentric rod when coupled with one end of the eccentric arm to the other end of the link foot. The quadrant block and the link is attached with the radius rod of the position of the quadrant block, and this link determines this direction travel of the engine. The block is the link attached with the radius rod with the position of the quadrant block in the link between the direction of the travel of the engine. The block is raised and lowered with the link means the lifting of the arms connected with the radius rod, lifting the linking and sliding the block fitted with the extension of the radius rod. Usually the engine travels forward with the quadrant block below the eccentric link and between, but sometimes, as in the case with the ACE 16 engines, the valve gears is arranged so that engines travels forward. The block is above the central link. What is eccentric? Eccentric is a circular disc attached to the axle, such as the eccentric does not coincide with the centric of the axle. The axle resolves the eccentric and ports with a portion of the eccentric rod similar to that which would caused by the crank. The motion of the slide valve is derived with eccentric. What is the distance between the center of the axle and the center of the eccentric called? The eccentric C. What does eccentric C represent? 1/2 the throw of the eccentric. Chapter 12, Westinghouse brake.